The citizens of late 13th century Japan should have had a reason to celebrate. Not once, but twice, smart tactics on the battlefield mixed with a little help from Mother Nature allowed them to push back an invading Mongol army that seemed like it was destined to conquer the whole world. But at a time when a wave of relief should have swept across the Japanese islands, trouble was brewing behind the scenes almost as soon as the last Mongol ship fled towards the Asian mainland. Trouble that saw Japan's military government, the Shogunate, go up against the country's emperor. The Muromachi period was a time that brought with it a myriad of conflicts, violence, backstabbing, and bloodshed. But even while all of this was going on, Japan managed to evolve culturally in many ways, including some changes to society that are still relevant today. So today, we take a look at both the ugly and the, well, less ugly sides of the Muromachi period. If you end up enjoying this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more samurai and Yakuza history. Want to help me create even more content like this in the future? Then consider checking out my Patreon page, where you can become a supporter starting at only $1 per month. With that out of the way, let's get started. This is the story of the Muromachi period of Japan. Following the Mongols' second attempted invasion of Japan in 1281, it was thought to be almost guaranteed that the army of Kublai Khan would return once more for a third encounter. An encounter that, as we now know, never happened, due to unrest inside the Khan's own empire, along with his own declining health. One person who strongly believed in a third invasion was Tokimune, a member of the Hojo clan that for a long time had served as regents to the shogun, therefore making them the de facto rulers of Japan. Tokimune, who was the shogun's regent during both Mongol invasions, passed away in 1284 and was succeeded by his son Sadatoki, who was only 12 years old at the time. This led to a strange and frankly confusing situation, where the shogun, who ruled in the name of the emperor in the first place, had a regent that himself required proxies due to his young age. Notice how I said proxies? Yes, there were actually two different samurai who took over regent duties in place of the underage Sadatoki. Japanese politics around that time were always kind of a mess. Apart from all the drama that was, as always, taking place among the country's leaders, more trouble was brewing outside of the shogunate as well. Those who risked their lives by fighting the Mongols a few years earlier were still waiting for a reward for their efforts. Problem was, the government didn't really have anything to give them. The Japanese up until that point were used to fighting among each other, which allowed the government to simply reward those who fought well with land taken from the losing side of the battle. But with the Mongol invasions being, well, you know, invasions, there was no land to seize and give away as a reward. Additionally, the defense preparations against the invasions had a lasting impact on the country's agriculture, meaning that resources were hard to come by for a while. Finances were drained in large parts by a massive army that was kept on standby for around 30 years in anticipation of the third invasion that never came. The government also used the threat of another invasion as an excuse to confiscate large areas of land for government use. Understandably, the samurai that fought to defend the country were fed up, and it was clear that the Kamakura shogunate that was in control of Japan for more than a century was approaching its final years. The chain of events that led to the downfall of the Kamakura shogunate a few decades later, maybe surprisingly so, would not be set off by angry samurai though. Emperor Go-Daigo, appointed in 1318, was tired of the military government in Kamakura that had been running things for 130 years. He was determined to make sure that the emperor, instead of hanging from them like a puppet, would once again be pulling the strings. His main opposition in turning this endeavor into reality would be a man that lacked such determination. Hojo Takatoki, who was the shogun's regent during the early reign of Emperor Go-Daigo, cared more about dances and plays than the actual running of the country. Not only that, but it was no secret that the shogunate's army was a shadow of its former self. When a clan dispute in the far north of Japan needed to be settled by the shogunate itself, the government troops actually lost to the clan's rebel army. Only when Takatoki sent a second army, the rebellion was finally crushed, which hardly took anything away from the embarrassment of losing the first encounter. Over the following years, Emperor Go-Daigo would make the necessary preparations for a future confrontation with the shogunate. As early as 1324, there were rumors about a secret society in the capital composed of high-ranking samurai that made overthrowing the shogunate its ultimate goal. The emperor was, despite denying such claims, closely associated with the secret society of samurai that soon caught the attention of the shogunate in Kamakura, after they were tipped off by an advisor to the emperor himself. The shogunate's troops moved into Kyoto in 1331, suppressed any potential uprising, and had Emperor Go-Daigo exiled to the remote Oki Islands. 2 years later, the emperor had escaped, assembled a new imperial army at Mount Senjo, and finally entered into a full-blown conflict with the shogunate in Kamakura, a conflict that became known as the Genko War. Descriptions of this war were a lot less glamorous and honorable than the ones that came before it. Things like announcing one's name and lineage before entering into an honorable one-on-one battle are notably absent from the Taiheki, the most detailed war chronicle of this period. Instead, both sides of the battle were not afraid of exploiting every single weakness of the enemy, or using trickery and deception to their advantage. Among the two most notable samurai of this war between the emperor and the shogun was a man named Kusunoki Masashige, who was allegedly only promoted in rank because the emperor had a dream in which he was sheltered by a camphor tree, which in Japanese just so happens to be called Kusunoki. Even though he was only promoted by sheer coincidence, Kusunoki was actually a brilliant tactician when it came to siege warfare in particular. Nowadays, he is remembered mainly for his undying loyalty towards Emperor Go-Daigo, which earned him a statue that even today graces the grounds just outside of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. The only samurai of the Genko War who turned out to be even more significant than Kusunoki was a man who fought for the opposing side, Ashikaga Takauchi. Ashikaga was sent by the shogunate to take out Emperor Go-Daigo himself, putting an end to the conflict once and for all. But as soon as he left the shogunate's territory, he switched sides and captured Kyoto in the name of the emperor, not the shogunate. At the same time, another shogunate samurai, Nita Yoshisada, also switched sides, and along with his army successfully crushed the shogunate in Kamakura. With one fell swoop, or two actually, the reign of the Hojo clan, and with it the Kamakura period of Japan, came to an end. But in the eyes of Emperor Go-Daigo, crushing the Kamakura shogunate was only part of the plan. His ultimate goal was to take away power and influence from the samurai altogether, bringing about an age of imperial authority never seen before in Japan. But what the emperor was seemingly not prepared for was that his plans would eventually be stopped in their tracks by one of the men who helped restore power to the imperial court in the first place. There is a small but noticeable 5-year gap between the Kamakura period that had just come to an end in 1333 and the Muromachi period that started in 1338. This 5-year gap, known as the Kenmu Restoration, is the short amount of time that Emperor Go-Daigo managed to stay in power before losing everything he had worked for more than a decade. How did he manage to mess it all up in such a short amount of time? Well, simply put, the emperor was ill-prepared for his actual reign at the top, and how to keep those who took him there happy. Not long after the emperor took over, the samurai started to wonder why they helped him in the first place. The construction of a fancy new imperial palace was paid for with the introduction of new taxes, while rewards for the samurai were meager at best. Ashikaga, the samurai leader who turned his back on the Kamakura shogunate just to help out the emperor, fully expected a big promotion. A promotion to the rank of shogun, to be exact. It might be important to note here that many of the samurai that helped Emperor Go-Daigo bring down the Kamakura shogunate were actually descendants of the Minamoto clan. Minamoto Yoritomo, of course, was the first shogun in Japanese history, before the Hojo clan swooped in, securing a firm grip on politics by serving as regents to the shoguns that followed. Not dissimilar to Emperor Go-Daigo, who wanted to once again see his own bloodline on top, the descendants of the Minamoto fully intended to finally re-establish themselves as the military rulers of the country. One such descendant of the Minamoto was, you guessed it, Ashikaga. Imagine his surprise when instead of a Minamoto, Go-Daigo's own son was appointed as shogun. Ashikaga, as you can imagine, was fuming and prepared to wage war against Emperor Go-Daigo. The decisive battle between the two sides took place in 1336 and saw Ashikaga's troops take on Go-Daigo's army, which was led by none other than Kusunoki, the samurai warrior who had been loyal to the emperor for so long. Tragically, the emperor himself, by interfering with his samurai leader's tactics, all but guaranteed the death of both Kusunoki as well as a defeat at the hands of Ashikaga's army. The Taiheki Chronicle quoted Kusunoki as saying, "The scheme to achieve victory by deceiving a numerically superior enemy apparently does not suit His Majesty. Instead, he issues a decree calling upon peerless warriors to throw themselves against this great foe, which is the same as ordering them to go to their deaths." Indeed, the battle was lost. Go-Daigo managed to flee to Yoshino, where he set up a new imperial court, while Ashikaga installed a new emperor at the original imperial court in Kyoto. The establishment of the new Ashikaga shogunate in 1338 officially marked the beginning of the Muromachi period, the first 50+ years of which are known as Namboku-cho, referring to the existence of two separate imperial courts, one in the north and one in the south, which would continue to duke it out for the following 5 decades. The word Muromachi refers to the Muromachi area of Kyoto, where the Ashikaga shogunate was located. The half-century-long conflict between the two rivaling courts eventually saw the slow but steady decline of the southern court, established by Go-Daigo. During the reign of the first Ashikaga shogun's grandson, called Yoshimitsu, the northern court would ultimately prevail, followed by multiple decades of relative peace, as well as political, economic, and cultural developments that would prove to have a huge impact on the future of the country. The Muromachi period's main theme was certainly war, bloodshed, and political drama. However, it's important not to forget that this period in Japanese history was hugely influential, not just in terms of politics, but also culturally. By the 14th century, contacts between China and Japan certainly existed, but they had also quieted down significantly. Under the reign of the third Ashikaga shogun, Yoshimitsu, that would change. By the way, he is completely unrelated to the Tekken character of the same name that many of you are surely thinking about. An opportunity to re-establish contacts with China came when the Chinese required support in getting rid of Japanese pirates that had recently made themselves comfortable along their coast. Yoshimitsu could kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. He would get rid of the Japanese pirates, a nuisance to him just as much as to the Chinese, while gaining a powerful new ally and trading partner. He accepted the offer to help the Chinese, later composing a letter to the mainland that might have been unthinkable just a century earlier, describing himself as, and I quote, "your subject, the King of Japan." Those who watched my video about the Mongol invasions will remember that Kublai Khan referring to the emperor as the King of Japan was seen as reason enough to go to war with the Mongols. Yoshimitsu seemingly didn't care, as long as he and Japan were able to profit from a healthy relationship with China. Through trade, Japan received all kinds of goods from the mainland: Chinese silk, porcelain, books, coins, etc. Chinese art from the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties also made its way into the shogunate's headquarters, from where it then spread to other parts of society, influencing Japanese artists in the process. The shogunate, now being so close to the imperial court, certainly helped in spreading such influences as well. Zen Buddhism had been known in Japan for a while, but only became immensely popular during the Muromachi period. Zen had an impact on almost every aspect of Japanese culture. Tea ceremonies, flower arrangement, calligraphy, stage plays, gardening. Many things that we now consider to be traditionally Japanese were developed or at least greatly influenced during the Muromachi period. Zen Buddhism actually wasn't the only religion that gained, or in this case regained, popularity around this time. Shinto religion was also on the rise. Having been around since around the Nara period of the 8th century, Shinto saw itself quietly coexisting alongside Buddhism for multiple centuries, until the Mongol invasions and the supposed divine intervention that came with it, the so-called kamikaze, revived Japan's interest in Shinto. Just as instrumental to the rise of Shinto was an influential chronicle from the 14th century, titled Chino Shotoki. The goal of its author, Kitabatake Chikafusa, was to once again remind the people of Japan of the importance of Shinto and the emperor's divine origins. Between the 14th and 17th century, Shinto slowly but surely became Japan's primary religion, a fact that still holds true to this day. Yoshimitsu suddenly passed away in 1408. His reign as the shogun of Japan would turn out to be the only time that the Muromachi period was relatively peaceful. Soon after the death of Yoshimitsu, conspiracy and infighting would once again creep its way into the capital, this time plunging Japan into one of its most war-torn time periods ever. By the 1460s, the 8th Ashikaga shogun, Yoshimasa, had been in office for more than a decade, raising the question of who would be his heir. Yoshimasa had no son, which was a bit of a problem, to say the least. The only logical solution, it seemed, was to make Yoshimasa's younger brother the next shogun, a turn of events that without a doubt would have been in the younger brother's interest. But just after Yoshimasa officially declared his brother as his successor, he had a child on the way. A son, to be exact. A son who was now expected to become the next shogun. With two rightful heirs to the title of shogun, powerful samurai and advisors to Yoshimasa started to take sides on who they thought should inherit control over the shogunate. Among them, two men in particular were notable for starting a conflict with massive consequences: Hosokawa Katsumoto and Yamana Sozen. It is said that these two had their differences long before the whole succession debacle, and merely saw it as an excuse to finally go at it. While Hosokawa took the side of the shogun's brother, Yamana sided with the son. And as you can imagine, an altercation between two samurai factions rarely ends without some kind of violence involved. As the two sides gathered their troops around the capital city of Kyoto, the shogun, who was not interested in a civil war inside the capital, warned them that whoever attacked first would be seen by the shogunate as a rebel. In spring of 1467, following a standoff that lasted for multiple months, the house of one of Hosokawa's men was lit on fire, resulting in a counterattack on the home of one of Yamana's generals. The fighting soon escalated, and the so-called Onin War, that would last for more than a full decade, had officially begun, bringing with it the final years of the Muromachi period, the Sengoku Chidai, translated as either the Warring States period or the age of the country at war. The Onin War's first arena was, of course, Kyoto itself. When Hosokawa's and Yamana's troops clashed, countless homes were pillaged or burned to the ground, while the city's courtyards and narrow streets saw most of the violent encounters between the two opposing samurai factions. Even some of the capital's most important temples were destroyed in the process. After a year, the conflict could not be contained in the capital anymore, and slowly started spreading out into the provinces, which were under the control of local lords that would later become known as daimyo. Due to the ongoing conflict inside the capital, even the lords that resided in Kyoto fled the city and set up home in the provinces. To the Japanese outside of the capital, the Onin War spreading across the whole country was proof that the shogun was not able to fulfill one of his most important duties: keeping Japan safe. And with trust in his shogun pretty much evaporated, the countless clans out in the provinces saw an opportunity to replace the Ashikaga as the true authority controlling Japan. The most prominent of these clans who were battling it out for more political power and influence included the aforementioned Hosokawa and Yamana, as well as the Akamatsu clan, led by General Akamatsu Masanori. The Onin War lasted until 1477, after more than a decade of fighting that claimed countless lives and had those who did survive exhausted, mentally and physically. As for Kyoto, Japan's capital city would take multiple decades to return to its former glory, with the rebuild requiring massive amounts of money and resources. The capital was so broke in the early 16th century, in fact, they couldn't even afford to bury the 103rd emperor, Go Tsuchimikado, instead keeping his corpse in the storeroom for a whole month following his death. His successor's coronation also had to be delayed by a full 20 years. In the end, there was no real victor at the end of the Onin War, but it was the Hosokawa clan that managed to follow in the footsteps of the Hojo clan, turning the shogun into nothing more than a figurehead under their control. The Ashikaga shogunate, though, which officially managed to stay around for another century, was now a mere shadow of its former self, and in the absence of a strong central government, the independent areas outside the capital, controlled by the local lords, the daimyo, managed to grow in size and strength. The Onin War might have been over, but Japan was now a fractured country, divided between countless clans that would prevent peace from truly setting in for more than a full century. It would take one of the most influential samurai lords in history to once again unify Japan, bringing the Muromachi period to an end while also laying the groundwork for a prolonged period of peace across the Japanese islands. In our next samurai history video, we take a look at the end of the Muromachi period and the rise of Oda Nobunaga. Which part of Japanese history would you like to see covered in a future video? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, I would like to give a huge shout out to all of my supporters on Patreon, including Busner. And to all of you who decided to finish this video, as always, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.